Hello everyone! On today's episode of Tinkering with Terrius, we have a couple items to unbox here. We have a Seasonic 650 watt prime power supply, and a Fractal Design Meshify C with tempered glass panel. So first up we'll do the case, just because that's going to require me to work at this zoomed out level a little bit. This is the part where we have to cross our fingers and hope that the tempered glass survived the shipping. The tempered glass is completely undamaged, so that's good. So first thing I'm noticing here, the back panel screws, thumb screws, are captive. That is very good. That way they don't get lost. So we've got all of our front panel connectors. These cables are all black except for the HD audio, which has the multicolored cable coming into it. Would be nice if that had a piece of heat shrink up to it, but that's fine. The back here you can see that there are some Velcro cable ties, and these are in the cable channel here. It's much better than a zip tie because they're of course reusable and they don't damage the cables in any way. There's some nice big rubber grommets at the sides, and there's a couple at the top here for the EPS connector. So everything should be able to route very nicely. There's tons of room in here, and at the bottom, behind all these dangling cables, we have the two hard drive bays. And these can hold 3.5 or 2.5 inch hard drives. It seems to be completely made out of metal, so that's kind of nice. And it's got the anti-vibration, so it shouldn't make a ton of noise even if you put a mechanical drive in these. There is the power supply bay, and that's where the power supply is going to sit. The top of the case here has a filter. Now, a filter isn't really necessary on an exhaust fan, but if you wanted to set these up as intakes on the top, you certainly could, thanks to the filter. So there's also a nice big filter on the bottom to protect against any dust ingress from any of these holes here. The back exhaust area here is open though. There's no filtering on that. If you run this case in a negative pressure configuration, you'll probably have some dust ingress through this rear panel here. But of course, even in the best design case, you will always have dust come in through the PCI slots if you run it in negative pressure. Aside from that, the case looks very sturdy. I believe the front here also has a dust filter. Let's take off the tempered glass here. The thumb screws for the tempered glass side panel actually have a little rubber gasket on them. It means they don't scratch up the tempered glass at all. Then on the inside, the nuts for these screws also have a rubber casing around the outside of them. So that's going to prevent you from chipping your tempered glass on the female or male chunks of the screw, hopefully. It also acts as a shock absorber for shipping. On the inside here we have two foam strips, one on either side, and that just seals right up against the edge of the case so that you don't get any air coming out of there or any noise really. At the top and the bottom on the case side there are the foam strips as well. So those are kind of like weather stripping for doors. They actually feel like the exact same foam that you use for weather stripping, so it's probably exactly what it is. I think I'm going to leave the protector on the tempered glass for a bit yet. I don't want to end up damaging the glass side panel if I don't have to. Now we can see inside the case, hopefully. At the back here we have a fan, and at the front we have a fan. So those are the two fans it comes with stock. You can see that it's not quite a full-size tower, it is a mid-tower, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you don't have a super big area to work with in here. Having that big deep cable management tray at the back comes at the loss of some internal space here, but since the hard drives are mounted in the bottom, that shouldn't really affect the case at all. The front of the case has a very dense foam filter. I don't think you'll be able to see it here. Have to take off the front so you can see that. This is foam, so that's going to prevent some of the sound coming out of the front of the case. I imagine if you take off this backing here, you could remove the foam completely, and that would let air come through a little bit easier if you don't care about the front fan noise. So I don't mind the fan configuration right now with the middle and the rear. I'm probably going to buy a few of the Noctua Chromax fans to fill in the rest of the slots. I mean, it's a pretty decent looking case. There's not a whole lot you can really say about it until we put it together. One of the best parts of the case here is that the power supply bracket is removable. It also has two captive screws, but this way you can just screw this right onto the back of your power supply and slide it in from the back rather than having to mess around with it and try and get it to fit. Something I noticed here at the bottom, I don't know if it's been pointed out in other videos, but this here has holes that are the same as on the hard drive brackets. The same configuration there. So it looks to me that if you wanted, you could just mount a 3.5-inch drive directly to the bottom of the case here without needing the hard drive cage in there at all. So that could save you some space if you wanted to put something in there. In addition, you could probably fit a bottom fan there if you were just to remove the hard drive cage altogether and not put a hard drive in at all. It looks like you can remove these rubber grommets from one of these hard drive caddies and just slide them in those bottom holes. So I think the only thing I would say about the tempered glass panel is that it would be nice if there was a lip at the bottom just to hold it in place a little bit. Something for it to rest on so that when you try to take it off, it doesn't just fall directly down onto the bench. If you're careful, it doesn't, but it's certainly easy for it to slide off there. Aside from that, I really do like the mounting method for these screws. Having that rubber gasket on there is actually really handy. And once you get a single screw in, you don't have to really worry about the side of the case falling off anymore. I wasn't going to do this, but let's take off the... There we go. Yeah, that's nice. Shiny. And you can see the tint, there is a bit of a tint. It's not quite completely see-through, but that's fine. I believe the dark tempered glass one is a much darker tint, to the point where it's almost difficult to see through the side panel at all. So that's the Meshify C. It's a very nice case. I believe the front of the case supports a 360mm radiator maximum. The top is 240. The back you could get a 120 on. Bottom you could probably fit a radiator of some sort if you take out the hard drive cage. Whether or not it would mount properly, that's another story. So here's the power supply. So normally with power supplies, you end up having the box and having to fight with it to try and get the internal box out of the thing, but they have nicely put a little handle here, which should theoretically mean, okay, power supply slides out nicely. And there's actually a cutout on both sides. It's pretty much all of the usual power supply marketing stuff on the back there. Japanese capacitors, what have you. They do show the lengths of all of the cables on the side of the box, which is nice. The box itself is pretty plain. And then the specifications right there. It's a single 12 volt rail. There's no splitting of the 12 volt rail on this power supply. And that's good or bad depending on how you look at it. Comes with some Seasonic cable ties, a whole bunch of zip ties. Comes with a 24-pin jumper for if you are doing a water cooling setup so that you can run the pump without having to turn on the whole system. I didn't realize it would come with that, but that is very, very cool. I'm not going to be liquid cooling. I'm just not brave enough, and it's expensive. A Seasonic sticker, some power supply screws, and a Seasonic case badge. Giveaway promotion thing they're doing, but it's only valid in the US, so that does not apply to me. Got the booklet, got an installation guide, and then the manual. The cable here that they supply, it's a very beefy power cable. Let's see, it's 16 gauge. Yep. So that is heavier gauge than most of the super cheap power supplies. Those will come with a really, really thin cable that's very flimsy. This cable is definitely rated for the amperage that this power supply is going to require. SATA cables and all of that are all just regular black flat cables, but the 24-pin cable is a braided cable. I think it's using that plastic cable cover material with the heat shrink around it. So that's interesting. That'll make the cable look a little bit cleaner when you're installing it in the case. Too bad the CPU power cable isn't that same kind of sleeved material. That would be interesting and nice. So this is the power supply, and it looks like we have a little protective plastic. Yep. The power supply itself, this is a very compact power supply unit. I'm actually quite surprised because last time I bought a 650 watt power supply it was quite a bit longer. All of the connections are on the back there. The CPU and PCIe connections, cables are all universal. That's because they all use 12 volts. The motherboard connection is to one side, and then the rest of the peripheral connections are there as well. It's got 5 CPU/PCIe connections. So that leads me to believe you could run 4 8-pin PCI cables and 1 8-pin CPU, or any combination therein. And this lets you toggle between it turning off the fan. If you have this on, it should turn off the fan when it's under a certain load, and when you have it off, it should just run the fan all the time. Standard power on off. The power supply itself has a matte coating over most of it, except here on this little part of the grill where it's a little glossy. Quite heavy actually for its size. All in all, this looks like a really, really good power supply. And if you don't know about Seasonic, they're basically a brand that's been around for a very long time. They were an OEM for a lot of Corsair power supplies back when I was working at a computer store. And they're one of the better brands out there for power supplies. I believe this Prime Gold has a 12-year warranty on it, so that's pretty decent, and the power supply is an item in the system that you want to kind of make sure you're getting a decent one. You don't want to go with the super ridiculously cheap ones that are going to burn out all your components. I will be putting the Seasonic power supply and my system from my Prodigy case into the Meshify C at some point here, probably this week or next week, and we'll do a video about that. That'll give a much better impression of how it is to build in the Meshify C. And then once I get the rest of the parts for a new system, we'll put those in there and do a complete build in it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, then be sure to give it a big thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below, or you can email them to me or tweet them to me. If you feel like sharing this video with your friends or anybody that might be interested in the Meshify C or the Seasonic 650 Prime, then be sure to go ahead. If you haven't already, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell icon. Hitting the bell icon lets YouTube notify you whenever I post a new video. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.